Most people discover the freeze response backwards. They experience something, a seizure, a shutdown, a period of blankness or immobility, and then spend months or years trying to find a name for it. The name, when it finally comes, rarely comes with an explanation. This lesson is the explanation. Freeze in FND does not always look the way you might expect. It is not always dramatic. It does not always involve falling or convulsing or losing consciousness entirely. It exists on a spectrum, and understanding that spectrum is the first step toward recognizing where you sit on it and when you are moving along it. The spectrum. At the mild end, freeze can look like slowing down. Thoughts become harder to access. Words feel further away. Movement requires more effort than it should. There is a quality of distance, as though you are watching yourself from slightly outside. This is the early edge of the cascade, the system beginning to disengage from full active processing. Further along, the body becomes more involved. Limbs may feel heavy or difficult to move. Vision can narrow. Hearing may become muffled or distant. Some people describe a sense of the world becoming less real, which is dissociation, the nervous system's way of creating psychological distance from an overwhelming experience. At the deeper end of the spectrum sits full tonic immobility. The body stops. It may shake or convulse as the motor system discharges. Consciousness may narrow to a point or disappear briefly. This is what many people with FND know as a functional seizure, and it is the nervous system completing the shutdown sequence it began much earlier. How it comes about. The route into freeze is rarely a single event. For most people with FND, it is a process of accumulation. The nervous system has a threshold, a point beyond which it moves from managed stress into defensive shutdown. That threshold is not fixed. It shifts depending on sleep, physical load, emotional load, sensory environment, and the cumulative weight of everything the system has been asked to process. On a good day, the threshold is higher. On a depleted day, it is much lower. What the data from Neurolog shows consistently is that sensory overload sits at the top of the trigger list for functional seizure episodes. Not a single overwhelming event, but the gradual accumulation of too much input, too much noise, too much light, too much demand, too much to process, until the system crosses its threshold and begins the shutdown sequence. This is why freeze can feel random. The final trigger, the thing that happens just before an episode, is often something small. A busy supermarket, a difficult conversation, a slight change in routine. From the outside, it looks disproportionate. From inside the nervous system, it is not disproportionate at all. It is the last straw, landing on a system that was already at its limit. The emotional signature, one of the most important findings to come out of real-world FND data, is what the emotional landscape around a freeze episode actually looks like. The assumption in medicine, and often in the minds of people living with FND, is that episodes are driven by high emotion, by panic, distress, or acute anxiety. The data tells a different story. The emotions most commonly reported around functional seizure episodes are numbness, emptiness, and hopelessness. These are hypoarousal states, the emotional equivalent of the system going quiet. Not a storm, but a stillness. Not too much feeling, but a particular kind of not feeling. This is significant for two reasons. First, it means that if you are waiting to feel panicked before you recognize you are approaching an episode, you may be missing the signal entirely. The signal for freeze is often the absence of feeling, not the presence of it. Second, it means that after an episode, when mood drops sharply, which the data also shows consistently, that drop is not a separate psychological event. It is part of the same cascade. The system has discharged, and the emotional aftermath, the flatness, the low mood, the sense of depletion, is the nervous system in recovery. Why this matters, understanding what freeze looks like in your own experience and how your particular route into it tends to go, is not an academic exercise. It is the foundation of everything practical in this course. You cannot interrupt a cascade you cannot see. The techniques that follow are only useful if you know when to reach for them. That means learning to read your own system, to notice the early signals before the threshold is crossed, and to understand that what looks like a sudden episode from the outside has almost always been building for longer than anyone realized. In the next chapter, we begin working with that. The first tool we reach for is the one you carry with you everywhere: your breath.